Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Ooley, and this is episode 112 of the Forge of Freedom. Today, I've got Mike Ooley back in the studio to talk about kind of a variety of topics. We're going to follow up on our discussion from last week about weapon-mounted lights just for a few moments, but then we're going to talk about actually an article or a column that was published in Gun Digest. It was the first of a regular column that I'm going to be writing for Gun Digest called Drawing Conclusions, and we're going to talk about the subject of that first article. So first of all, Mike, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, and good morning.
Good morning. So after our discussion last week about weapon-mounted lights, Charlie Cook, and if those of you who don't know Charlie Cook is behind the podcast Riding Shotgun with Charlie, where he talks with a lot of people in the firearms industry, the training world, the gun industry, about their role and their how they got into the firearms industry and just about who they are. So it's really kind of an interesting podcast. But he pointed out to me a video that Massad Ayoob had done with Wilson Combat about weapon-mounted lights that I thought was really good and actually supports the Ken Hackathorn's discussion about weapon-mounted lights. Of course, Ken Hackathorn was berated for saying that weapon-mounted lights or lights in general, I think, are overrated. But that wasn't really the point. His commentary was taken out of context, and we discussed that last week. But I think Massad Ayoob does a good job sort of supporting the point that he was making.
Well, in a nutshell, what we were talking about, I think, anyway, is Ken Hackathorn was, I think, unjustly attacked by a lot of GunTube influencers just to get clicks on their particular channels. But I think what Ken Hackathorn was saying is that a handheld flashlight is an essential piece of gear that you need to have along with your firearm, and that the weapon-mounted light, I mean, you kind of, it's not essential in the context of a private citizen. Like it might be in a military or law enforcement context. So the handheld light's essential. The weapons mounted light is more an optional accessory. And that was sort of I didn't go back. I've probably seen Massad Ayoob's, if it was one of those Wilson Combat YouTube channel things, I've probably seen that. I don't recall it specifically, but I'm glad. I hope it bolstered what Ken Hackathorn was saying and also what we were saying.
It does. And I'm going to pull it up here shortly. I'm not going to play much of it, but I want to show people which video I'm referring to. But he talks about, number one, that a handheld light should be primary, and a weapon-mounted light, while it might be a useful tool, would be secondary in his mind. And I think it can be a useful tool with proper training. But I think that the way that you see people use it and say that it should be used online oftentimes is very cavalier and can get people in trouble. And that kind of leads us into the topic we're going to talk about next, the Gun Digest article about pointing, being careful about where you're pointing firearms.
Yeah, and if I could, I'll just a couple more points that sort of ancillary points, I think, more than points specifically about the weapon-mounted lights, and that is a lot of times, we do some purely instruction with respect to firearms. Sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's just marksmanship and those sorts of things.
Safe gun handling,
gun handling, defensive gun use, that sort of thing. But I always say that we're just conduits. I have probably almost zero, if not zero, original ideas, and most of this stuff is just, you've got to vet what other people say. Charlie Cook, I'm sure, has done this. He sent us Massad Ayoob's video. Sometimes I read from, I think last week I read from Tiger McKee's Book of Two Guns. And if you look at his book, he's to a great extent just citing things that Clint Smith said, or that Jeff Cooper said, or that Massad Ayoob said. So, really, most of the stuff is not too difficult. You just have to apply the requisite amount of time to sift through this. And after you do it long enough, you're going to find out, the cream's going to rise to the top, and you're going to find out what works best for you and what's just marketing and somebody trying to get clicks and that sort of thing. So I think that's another point that needs to be taken away from our discussion about weapon-mounted lights, is it can apply to lots of things. in the self-defense community, whether it's legal concepts maybe, or whether it's simply, marksmanship, gun handling, safety, mindset, whatever it is.
So I'm going to pull up, for those of you watching by video, this video of Massad Ayoob talking about weapon-mounted lights on a handgun. This is on the Wilson Combat channel, and you can see it says Massad Ayoob Critical Mass EP40. This is a video that was recorded, it says, a year ago, and I'll link to this, of course, in the show notes. But this section here, you can see starting at the 1 minute 35-second mark about light spillover. He talks about this concept you hear a lot of people talking about, using the ambient light or the light spillover to identify the threat. The problem with that is that even though you're not directly pointing the firearm at the target, that may still nevertheless constitute something like felony aggravated assault, or in Indiana, intimidation or pointing a firearm. There's certainly case to be made that by a prosecutor that's possible. Okay, so you could be facing, if you don't know if that person in your home late at night is a threat or not, and you shine the ambient light, the light spillover down the hallway, you've got a firearm pointed down the hallway. Even if it's at the floor, it's still in the direction of whoever is standing at the end of the hallway, and you don't even know if it's a threat yet or not.
Yeah.
So that's a problem, and that's what Massad Ayoob gets into here. And Massad Ayoob, by the way, we've talked about it on many occasions. He's one of the foremost experts in the use of force with a firearm. So he's testified in many, many, many court cases about these nuanced details.
Yeah, and I think your illustration is appropriate. Also, think about the Walmart parking lot where there may be some video, there may be 4 witnesses. I'm not telling you anything, that eyewitness testimony is probably the least reliable form of testimony you can get. Videos are not necessarily as good as some people might think because of depth, because of just the perspective of the video. But I'm an advocate of not introducing a firearm in a situation that until it's absolutely necessary. And that partly is based upon your training, how quickly you can draw a handgun and interdict a situation where it's necessary. But anytime somebody can see a firearm, they may either mistakenly or on purpose indicate that you were pointing it at somebody or using it inappropriately. So if we can avoid interdiction with a firearm, we try to do that. Absolutely try to do that.
Yeah. All right. So,
by the way, one thing I noticed, Massad's the video there, one thing we didn't talk about, you did some. I think you mentioned John Correa, and what's the term? I don't want to steal somebody else's term.
He said face melting lumens.
Yeah, face melting lumens. I don't think it's necessary that you worry about those, like John Correa said. Once again, we're regurgitating good information. I think you don't have to worry about having 2,000 lumen flashlight. I know the one I carry in my pocket all the time, every day, which gets used for all kinds of things for old eyes, is like a little over 100 lumens. My nightstand,
in which, by the way, we have actually trained with, and works exceptionally well in dark situations.
I've used it in a Gunsite class because, as a private citizen, I'm not, once again, we talked about the flashlight. It's used to locate and identify bad guys. As a private citizen, I don't need to do that at 100 yards with my handgun or 50 yards with my handgun, but my 100 lumen light works fine. And the thing is I have it with me all the time. I don't have to go look for it. It's not somewhere else. It's with me all the time, every day. And then I have other ones that, in vehicles, on rifles that are 600+ lumens. Is that right? I don't know. That's what I have. If you want 1,200 or 1,800 or whatever, do it. But I would make a point. Make sure you get a high quality flashlight. I'm not sure that you can buy one at Walmart that I would be satisfied with meets sort of durability and quality standards. I mean, there are lots of flashlights out there. I have the little one I carry with a AA battery or AAA battery. AAA is a Pelican, and then most of my other flashlights are Surefire flashlights because I have a lot of confidence in them. But one other last point, I mentioned it last week, make sure you have a clip on it or a lanyard, or I had a little rubber O-ring, some way that you can still retain the flashlight while you manipulate the firearm. You may have to open a door, those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's I think a great point. And I can't remember, in one of the videos I linked to in the show notes from the weapon mounted light video we recorded last week, I think John Correa does talk about the lanyard that you're talking about, but basically it allows you to take a handheld flashlight and flip it over the top of your hand so you can still manipulate the firearm as if you had two hands available.
And that's what I have. So I think that's important. Some of the lower end lights don't have provisions for clips or those sorts of things, but there are some aftermarket companies that make things so that you can retain that firearm and still manipulate your gun.
Yeah. But you mentioned having a brighter light for your vehicle or for outside, but I think this is a good point too. And I'll mention John Correa here again, because he's got a lot of these sort of good mnemonic devices. He was a former pastor, I think is very effective public speaker and uses a lot of things that I think help remember certain lessons. And he says the mission drives the equipment train. And that's exactly right. You don't want 5,000 lumens when you're trying to illuminate your narrow hallway in your house. You'll blind yourself. Mm-hmm. If you're outside, that's a different story. Okay. Maybe, but it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. And so absolutely the light you have in your vehicle may be different than the one you keep on your nightside, on your nightstand or in your pocket.
Okay. Yep. Once again, just keep in mind, we don't, as a private citizen, it's the same. The purpose of the light is to identify and locate. And we're not in the business like law enforcement or even the military more so, where we're out trying to hunt people.
Right. Yeah. We don't have to capture bad dudes in the dark.
Yeah.
All right. So definitely, this video is only 9 minutes long. This video with Masada, you go watch the whole thing. I think I pointed out this segment starting at 1:35, really through the 4.5 minute mark. I think you should pay particular attention to, but just go watch the whole thing. It's only 9 minutes long.
Yeah. And all the Wilson Combat, I must say, it's another episode, but I'm disappointed that Larry Vickers is not part of the Wilson Combat educational series anymore, and we can go into that some other time. Because Larry Vickers is a good dude too, that's got a lot of wisdom. But the Wilson Combat videos are very, very good.
Yeah. All right. So,
by the way, we should thank Charlie Cook. His work product is very, very good as well.
Yeah. So thanks, Charlie, for pointing out this video. And definitely go check out. I'll link to his show in the show notes as well. It's on YouTube and also available by podcast. So I'll link to Riding Shotgun with Charlie as well. The next thing that we want to chat about, Mike, is the Gun Digest article. And this is...
Are you going to talk about the training? I know you mentioned Greg Ellifritz and stuff.
Yeah.
Are you going to do it later?
I was going to do that later.
Okay, that's fine. I'm sorry.
But we'll wrap up with that. But it's all kind of related.
Okay.
I'll mention, Mike's alluding to, thanks for the reminder, but I want to mention some training. We talked about weapon mounted lights and whether you're using a handheld or a weapon mounted light. Training is very important with either. Okay. Don't just get on Amazon or Midway USA and pick the light with the best specs or the best reviews. Pick one and get some training. Because you may find out it's not, in fact, the light that's best for you, but you'll also learn a lot of small details about how to use it that people overlook, especially on the internet. Okay, so the next thing, and I've pulled this article up, it's my first article with Gun Digest. I inherited this column called Drawing Conclusions from Marty Hayes, so I want to thank him as well for giving me this opportunity, or at least putting me in touch with the folks at Gun Digest.
Another guy that knows what he's talking about. So if he says something, read his stuff too.
Marty Hayes, for those of you who don't know, is the founder of Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, which is a post-defense support network. So if you're involved in a self-defense situation and you are prosecuted or sued, it's an organization that will help not only provide you and support you from a legal fee perspective, but will also put you in touch with a network of experts and attorneys who have some knowledge, particular expertise in firearms and self-defense. Okay, so definitely go check that out if you haven't already. Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. It's armedcitizensnetwork.com, I believe. And
.org.
And I'll link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, and by the way, once again, we're just conduits. That's my role anyway. He does some original thinking, but I'm not. That's not my thing much anymore.
There's very little original thinking. We stand on the shoulders of people from many, many years ago. If you go back and read Plato and Aristotle, it's amazing to see what they thought about. Of course, they weren't thinking about a lot of the firearms topics, but they were thinking about a lot of the same moral questions that we're thinking about today. And so there's very little original thinking.
There has to be some to improve the situation, and that happens. Particularly some of the younger folks in this industry do that, and we appreciate that. It's funny. It just occurred to me, the founders. Sometimes we need to do original thinking to improve things. The founders, though, the politicians in our government, we've screwed that up with some original thinking.
Most of the time, we need to remember the wisdom that previous generations have already discovered, and so that's mostly what we're trying to do here, is to preserve that wisdom and to assimilate it in a way that people can understand it.
Yeah, but my point, and I got a field here, is that Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, they provide a service that's a very valuable service. You should look into that. But just the educational material they have, their monthly newsletter, is well worth the time and effort it takes to look through that stuff, because I think mostly Gila and Marty as well puts an enormous amount of work into that and concentrates a great deal of information and knowledge in the written form, so it can be a very efficient use of your time to read the articles that they have posted.
Yeah, and I went ahead and pulled up their website here. Again, it's armedcitizensnetwork.org. And like Mike said, there's a ton of information on this website for free. But if you're a member, you get access to a bunch of educational videos that are just worth their weight in gold if you care about defending yourself with deadly force, or with any degree of force, really. Mm-hmm. So definitely consider them if you're in the market for post-defense support. Okay, there are insurance products out there. This is not an insurance product, but it's sort of operates a little bit like some of those other products. But do your own research, and certainly consider Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. Their journal, if you just go and read their monthly journal, you can see here, going back to 2008, they've got a collection of their journals. There's just so much great information, knowledge, and like we said, wisdom contained in those journals. So I'll link to that in the show notes as well. Now, getting back to the Gun Digest article, you can see the title is More Than Child's Play, The Legal Implications of BB Guns. And part of the reason behind sharing this particular topic is people are always worried. They're fixated on using deadly force and actually defending themselves with a firearm, where they actually fire the gun and hit somebody. Okay, and that's not usually how it plays out in the legal world. As an attorney, I defend lots and lots of people, and by far, I see way more cases where the firearm is never discharged. Number one. And number two, I see a lot of cases where it's not even a real firearm. It's a pepper ball gun or a BB gun or something less lethal than a firearm, or non-lethal. And I think people overlook the legal ramifications of those types of devices. And BB guns, especially in today's day and age, are can be pretty powerful and pretty effective. If it's an airsoft gun, for instance, will sometimes discharge a plastic pellet at hundreds of feet per second. So it can be pretty effective, or at least cause serious bodily injury. And so that's really the purpose of this article, is to sort of analyze how you can get in trouble with something like a BB gun.
And I think it's important too. Well, first of all, I'll mention, I don't have a recollection of the specific details of the case that I'm thinking about now, but there have been instances where, for instance, I think teenage kids have had firearms in a public scenario, and police roll up on the scene, and the police misidentify what's a BB gun or an airsoft gun or something like that as a traditional firearm,
a real firearm,
yeah, and the teenager shot and or killed potentially. So these things look very real, particularly under a stressful situation. And we won't go into it here about what happens when we're in a life or death situation, or what we perceive to be a life or death situation. But it makes dulls the judgment of many folks, and most folks actually, in that sort of scenario.
So one impetus behind this article and talking about it is people underestimate the legal ramifications. But the other part, and this is the part you're alluding to, is people underestimate the practical ramifications of introducing something that looks like a firearm into what could turn out to be a deadly force encounter if you're not careful.
And you may say to yourself, well, who's going to do that? But we've had people who have suggested that they're not ready or willing to use a real firearm, and their thought process in a self-defense situation, and their thought process is they don't know that they want to be involved in an incident where they inflict serious bodily injury or maybe even death upon somebody. So they're going to use the BB gun to scare somebody, or
they think displaying something that looks like a real firearm will deter the potential criminal, when in reality it's more likely or just as likely to escalate the situation, and you're going to be stuck in what may be a deadly force encounter with a BB gun.
So that may seem strange to you, but there are folks out there that's the thought process that they've gone through. And you may encounter folks like that. And it's sort of an ancillary sort of thought process that I've heard people articulate is that, once again, they're not sure they could use a firearm in self-defense really, but they still want a firearm so they can use it as a deterrent or as a threat. A real firearm is a threat, and that's not a good idea in our estimation either. But it's sort of an ancillary concept to the BB gun.
Yeah, and I had a case. I'm not going to get into all the particulars, but it was a pepper ball gun, and the pepper ball gun comes with an orange slide, so that it's obviously not a firearm. It's a bright orange plastic slide. It's still in the shape of a firearm, but it's obviously not one. Well, this particular individual painted the slide black so that it would look more like a real firearm, when in reality it was just a pepper ball gun. So it would project with compressed air these little balls that, when they impact, they disperse, basically pepper spray.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, terrible idea, because you're introducing something that looks like a real firearm into a potentially deadly situation, and you may escalate the situation rather than deter it or de-escalate it. Our goal is always, and we tell people this all the time, always to avoid the situation if possible. That's the only true win. And then number two, de-escalate if possible.
Yeah, and even I've looked at some of these pepper spray mechanisms that take the rough shape of a firearm, even the ones that you mentioned, the case you had where the one was modified to look even more like a gun with paint, even the ones that aren't modified, in a low light, rapidly developing situation, I could see somebody misidentifying that as a firearm.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're not talking about whether deadly force in reaction to the use of pepper spray is appropriate or isn't appropriate. We're not addressing that today. But what we are addressing is trying not to escalate a situation with something that looks like a firearm.
Yeah. All right, so that's where I think we'll leave it with this discussion. Go check out that article at Gun Digest. Again, that's a column, a monthly column that I'll be writing for Gun Digest. Mike helps me edit those, revise those articles, so give him credit there as well. But again, it's going to be monthly at Gun Digest, and then also a quarterly column as well, and it's the Drawing Conclusions column. The last thing I want to mention before we close up that we alluded to earlier is training. And of course, whether it's with weapon-mounted light or a handheld light or just generally firearms and self-defense training, we think that training is badly overlooked, okay? That people focus way too much on the equipment. Again, whether it's lights or guns or whatever it is, whatever gizmo it is that you're looking at, training is by far the most important component of your self-defense regimen.
Okay? A much used quote from Colonel Cooper, Jeff Cooper. I don't know if it's a piano or a guitar, but some people say, just because you own a guitar doesn't make you a musician, or just because you own a piano doesn't make you a musician. You need to learn how to use that instrument.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to mention there are lots of great training resources out there. Obviously, we teach some classes. You can find information about our classes at forgeoffreedom.com, along with the podcast, and occasionally I blog from time to time there as well. But there are also one that we talk about occasionally is Greg Ellifritz. He's got the Active Response training website, and he has his complete 2024 calendar up there. I'm going to show you that website here. Again, it's activeresponsetraining.net. And you can see he has the 2024 classes on the menu at the top of his website. I really enjoyed, my wife and I took the tactical first aid class last year. You can see there was one here in February, tactical first aid and system collapse medicine. I believe he has another one of those coming up later this year. Definitely check that out. He also has some great revolver classes, handgun, shotgun, lots of great stuff from Greg. Also read his blog, especially the weekly or the weekend knowledge dump.
Once again, I'm a plug there, sort of like I did with the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, where Gila and Marty condense all this great information. That's what Greg Ellifritz does with his weekly compilation. He applies his knowledge and kind of filters through all the garbage. And you can go through there and read it all, or if you don't have time, just read the things that are of particular interest to you. But
if all you ever do is read the weekend knowledge dump that Greg puts out weekly, you will be incredibly well informed very quickly. Because, like Mike said, he really sifts through the garbage and applies his knowledge as a filter to provide you with information from other great resources.
Yeah, don't skip Jeff Cooper's Principles of Personal Defense and Masada Ayoub's books, but that's Greg's stuff will get you 90% of the way there.
Yeah. The other thing we've mentioned previously is Gunsite Academy, which is sort of the Harvard, although Harvard's not necessarily a good thing anymore. That's almost a derogatory. It's almost a derogatory term.
Yeah.
But it's the premier, one of the premier gunfighting schools in the world, and their main facility is in Paulden, Arizona, but they've expanded their offering of off-site classes. And recently they added Orlando, Florida to their list of off-site offerings. If you go to their website, gunsite.com, you'll see the menu off-site classes. They're going to offer the 150 class, which is their intro class, but sort of their premier class or their most popular class is their 250 class, which they're not going to offer in Florida, at least not yet. But they offer it in at least Nashville, and maybe do they offer it anywhere else?
The 150?
The 250.
They may. I don't know.
At least in Tennessee, at Nashville, and then also in Arizona. So we wanted to bring people's attention to that expanded offering, especially if you're in Florida, because I think this is a great opportunity to get into to training in a good way.
And who's teaching? Did you tell me?
Ken Campbell will be there.
Okay.
Ken will be there with a few other instructors.
And Ken Campbell is, first of all, we'll get a plug in for the Hoosier State. He's a Hoosier. I'm going to call him a Hoosier, although he lives in Arizona now, but he was the former sheriff of Boone County. And he's now, I'll probably butcher what his title is, but he's
he's in charge.
He's in charge. Yeah. Whatever that, I'm not sure what the title is. He's in charge of running the place, but he's going to teach that class down in Orlando. And I will say I've taken a 150 class when he was sheriff here in Boone County. Doris and I, my wife, we went up to the range up there and took a 150 class, and it's a really, really, really good class. He taught that class. And it's a little shorter than the 250 class. It's only 3 days, I guess. I'm not sure how many hours. You don't get the shoot house, that sort of thing with it, but it's very, very good class, and would certainly recommend that to anybody if you don't have an entire week. And I'm not sure about that one, but I can't remember. It's been so long, whether it was in conjunction with a weekend, so people don't have to miss as much work maybe, or something.
Usually
like that.
They are, but
yeah. But I would definitely recommend that. And I think you'll really be impressed, and it'll be a treat to take a class with Ken Campbell.
So we've mentioned lots of other training opportunities as well. But those are two that I wanted to bring to your attention this week. And I did pull up Ken Campbell's bio on the Gunsite Academy website. He's the chief executive officer.
Yeah, and I think everybody should take a Gunsite class if they can. It's sort of like, you really get the Jeff Cooper flavor of training there. Although they've changed, it's not exactly like it was when Jeff Cooper taught it. I wasn't there when Jeff Cooper taught it, but it's a good thing. It's kind of like reading the Federalist Papers. Everybody ought to read the Federalist Papers too.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Mike. Well, I think that's where we'll leave it for now. Anything else you wanted to mention before we close up the show?
No, except I really, once again, this is self-aggrandizing, I think is the word I'm trying to think of for you, but you've had some good some good podcasts on the kind of the freedom side where you analyze some things that are going on at the local level in terms of the Second Amendment. And I would suggest people go back there. Some of your podcasts, I don't know which ones they were. They've been pretty recent that talk about how the Second Amendment is now being applied at the local trial.
Oh, those were the Rajon Rondo
cases. Those are really good podcasts. And folks ought to take a look at those, because I'm encouraged about, for so many years, the Second Amendment, it was kind of talked about in a theoretical sense, but it's making a difference now. And I even noticed this last week, there was a judge in Louisville, although maybe she didn't get some of the interpretation exactly right. She was trying to apply Bruin to a local
she decided that felon in possession statutes are unconstitutional.
Yep.
Because there's no historical analog based on the Bruin, the test laid out by Bruin. So that was an interesting case, and maybe we'll get into a case like that sometime.
Yeah,
sometime in the future.
But I think it's all encouraging, and you're demonstrating how it's making a difference at like I said, the local level for real people. Somebody that didn't have to spend $1 million to get to the Supreme Court.
Right. All right, so that's where we'll leave it for now. Again, I'll link to a lot of these resources in the show notes. Those are always available in the show notes wherever you find the podcast. They're also available on our website at forgeoffreedom.com. There's a catalog of all of our episodes there. You can search for it on the website. You can find, I put a summary with chapter markers there on the website. So it's a great place to go back and look at information like this that we've talked about now over the course of 112 episodes. So there's a quite a collection of information there as well. The last thing I want to talk about, I want to share with you, is just a quote. To disarm the people, that was the best and most effectual way to enslave them. That's a quote by George Mason. And then the next one I want to share with you: no good act can produce an evil result. Evil means, even for a good end, produce evil results. So think about that when you think about what politicians do day to day when they say, we're going to take your privacy away to protect you for your own good. We're going to go to war so that we can maintain peace. We're going to do all these things that are evil in and of themselves to do something good. And think about how often you hear things like that from the government and in the news. So anyway, I hope you enjoy those quotes. Think about those. And of course, stay tuned for Friday. I'm going to have a guest, a contributor to the Mises Institute, on this week to talk about an article that she wrote. She's actually from Brazil, a lady from Brazil. We're going to talk about public schools, government schools. The title, I'm going to not get it exactly right, but it's something, basically the gist of it is, the only good government school is a closed one. So stay tuned for that.
Well, the good news is we're moving in that direction.
Yeah, exactly. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Of course, it helps if you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe to help us spread the message of freedom. Share it with your friends and family. And as always, you can find it on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and all the most popular podcast streaming platforms. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Forge of Freedom. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Alex, you can go to forgeoffreedom.com or follow him on Twitter at Forge of Freedom. Until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.